And you can see me and hear me just fine. And I'm coming out
Super.
good.
Yeah. And you can hear me as well?
Well, you're coming out crystal clear, which is a good thing. And I got used to with the, you know, 10
Can
times.
I hear
So
you? Can you hear me?
I did an episode with Gino recently. It was in person.
Yeah.
It was the first time in person
Yeah.
since maybe it was such a relief. I was like, oh my God, we don't have to restart Kilmarra. He's like, yeah, why would you do that? I'm like, no, it's real.
Yeah, just it's real.
We're not on Zoom.
we're all we're all zoomed out.
Yeah,
End of 2020. Enough Zoom.
enough Zoom. This podcast is made possible by the generosity of listeners like you. Kindly consider a contribution through Patreon or PayPal. Links are in the details box. Patreon is a monthly subscription that you can cancel anytime, and PayPal is a one-time donation. Any amount is appreciated. And follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, the handle, the Beirut Banyan. And you can find us on our YouTube channel with the same name, and you can start watching the episodes as they're released. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan. I really was looking forward to this episode for a number of reasons. The first is I think the reason I still have hope in the medium term, in the long term, it's because of positions that you've taken, it's words that you express. I think it's coming from people that are deeply active and not giving up. And I respect a lot of things you do. And in particular, the commitment to something new, a new political movement, turning the page, someone who's been involved in politics in Lebanon for quite some time and has evolved with the politics as well. And I know this is a very long introduction, but it's just my way of saying thank you. And before we jump into all that is Lebanon, right now, given given how paralyzed everything feels, given that it's really a difficult stretch, and given that no one is okay with what's happening, are you excited that 2020 is ending? I'm going to start there, just with the last stretch of this year. Are you looking forward to 2021? We can start from there before getting into the more the bigger issues. Because I'm relieved that this year is coming to a close.
Yeah. I can't say that this year has been anything but farthest from ideal,
Yeah.
farthest from you know yeah, I think most of us will look back at 2020 and see it in a very special way, but not in a way that probably evokes a lot of positive memories.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely excited that the year is coming to an end. Now, do I think 2021 is going to be a little bit better? I think that's a different question, but you can only do so much.
I really want 2021 to be better. That's all, just
Yeah,
not worse. But
yeah,
let's get into why 2020 was such a bad year, and let's also maybe get into what the positive energy was that took us into 2020. Because I left Lebanon in January of 2020, and I still remembered a lot of hope on the streets. The protests were still primarily positive, and I'm going to use this word carefully. I don't mean in that they ever really had a negative tone per se, but that there was maybe the euphoria was still there, and the euphoria that really expressed itself eloquently in October. And I think it persisted beyond the new year. And then things changed, and the tone changed, and maybe the reaction changed as well, meaning that the political class, the regime itself, maybe took a different tone as well. There was a lot of pushback. But going back to where we were at the beginning of the year, do you think that that is a permanent thing? In other words, that you cannot completely crush this moment, that the October uprising is a permanent factor in Lebanese politics, and that there's nothing that you can do about that. whether it takes a year, 5 or 10 years to change things, that it's done. People woke up and they're not going to tolerate the situation that we were living in up until 2019, up until October.
Yes, of course. I mean, you look back at October 17, 2019, and I think that if I had to summarize it, it was a collective awakening. It was an awakening that a lot of us felt that we were this, the silent majority, that the feelings that we had about the state we want to live in, the feeling that we had about corruption, the fights, the rights we've been asking for the longest time was actually felt by a huge, majority of Lebanese. And then when that narrative changed and everything was all hands on deck, in terms of calling politicians out, in terms of following up on corruption files, in terms of just completely changing narrative that we've never been used to in the country up until that day. And there's definitely, you can't go back to that. Now, back from that, sorry. And now I think the financial situation as well and the financial collapse doesn't really help, because the quality of life in Lebanon and the way that we've been living is something that we'll never see again in the near future.
Right.
Not that it's a bad thing in itself. So definitely, I think that we're at a passive point of no return, and this is a fight that we're not at the beginning of it, and we're not at the end of it per se. I wouldn't say that there's light at the end of this tunnel just yet, but we're firmly in the middle, and we got to keep pushing. We got to keep persisting.
This firmly in the middle, is that really what Minteshreen is about right now? That it's almost it's writing out this chapter, but it's meant to just keep evolving. Do you see yourself as maybe filling the gap?
Yeah, I mean, if I just wanted to take a step back and see how to explain to you how Minteshreen had started, it was completely organic. It was a bunch of us being caught in the moment and feeling that, okay, what do we need to do on the streets tomorrow? What do we do after tomorrow? How do we evolve this? Okay, we need to do something on EDL to talk about electricity. Can we do an event in the egg? Okay, let's go and do it. Closing down parliament. And then that we all, it was almost an intuitive feeling that if we want to survive this environment, we're going to need to mobilize, we're going to need to organize a little bit better. And then COVID came along.
So sorry, surviving means organizing too. That there is a level
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if the country and if the civil society, let's say, or the opposition, or whatever you want to call us, or the resistance, if we were organized, I think in October 17, we probably would have been able to achieve much more than we did.
Yeah.
And the biggest failure is the fact that there was no proper grassroots organization. There wasn't, grassroots political movement. There wasn't even a centralized, consolidated vision. And it's gonna, I personally, I feel like it's going to blow up again sometime. And I think that we've constantly seen, at least in the recent history of Lebanon, that we always have these intervals where hope springs up and spontaneous movements kind of happen. And it will be extremely reckless, I think, and irresponsible if the next time that hope springs back, the next time spontaneous movements happen, if we're not ready politically in an organized manner, then that's yet another opportunity missed. And we're working as hard as we can to make sure that doesn't happen, because that's essentially what's needed. We need new political parties. This revolution should have created not only new political parties, but at the same time a new understanding of what politics is, a new understanding of what needs to be offered in the country. You talked about leadership and that transitional aspect of leadership, but we kind of are obsessed in this country in terms of names. Can we name names in a government, or can we, who can be this leader? But I think that more importantly than individuals, and we are a very individualistic society, is to switch from names to ideas and to vision and to policy. And it doesn't really matter, if it's Samit or if it's Ronnie or if it's, whoever. The whole point is the idea and the belief and a set of ideals that we want to fight for.
May I ask you, Samit, when you say an individualistic society, is that more are you referring to Zaim? In other words, that it's a leadership oriented society, or did I, maybe I misunderstood? Is that versus collectivist society? Because in my mind, Lebanon is famous for its collectivist nature, and that kind of gets into other areas I want to explore. But just in terms of the word individualistic, is it less to do with individual expression and more to do with individual leader, or just to clarify what that means?
Yeah. No, I mean this whole idea of Zame, I think also
Mm,
trickles
mm,
down
mm.
to society.
Right.
I don't think that we very much were a society. I mean, in times of tragedy and this, you know, the heinous crime of August 4, or even on October 17, you saw people get together. But I mean, other than those historic moments, we were a very much a me society. You
Mm,
know, it,
right.
we I don't I genuinely don't believe that we had this idea of what a community is supposed to be, or how you're supposed to participate in society, really. And that could stretch from paying taxes to you know, okay, if I'm someone who's lucky, if I'm someone who has been blessed, then I need to participate to make sure that the most vulnerable people in my society are also protected.
Oh, I see. So it's
I
more like
think that,
almost like a selfish expression.
yeah, absolutely. I
Right,
mean,
right. Yeah.
yeah. So
Mm.
I think that the narrative needs to kind of switch from this idea of we live like kings and I can do whatever I want and I can get away with it and I know this person and I'm well connected, and that's kind of what my uh, modus operandi is, to becoming that, you know, we have a problem as a country,
Right.
and the only way that that gets solved is with a new understanding of what our social contract is. And the only way that you're going to be able to get a new social contract is if you have an inclusive and wide-reaching political party as possible.
Confessionalism in itself is not the big problem, even though it's a subject that should be addressed, and maybe it can be in ways that are very straightforward. That could even be just a Senate or something that addresses confessional concerns in a healthy way. But I like that you've said confessional clientelism, and that's the ugly side of sectarian governance. And that kind of, the sort of communities protect themselves when they're under attack, even when that attack may be the, the right attack, but it's almost like a self-preservation, but it's not the individual, it's the communal at the cost of the country. And I'm just going to quote you to you with your permission, because you mentioned something today on
Sure.
Twitter, and it just sort of, I think it spoke to the moment, and I want to get your opinion on the tweet and what it reflects. And this is in reference to, I think it happened this morning, Hariri going to Hassan Diab and sort of shielding Hassan Diab in a sense. So I'll quote you to you. Hariri defending Diab after continuously trying to discredit him is disgusting. Both should have been called in for questioning. After all, Hariri did go on record in 2019 talking about his cabinet's responsibility for the port. And then the follow-up tweet. This sectarian charade, in the face of any sort of accountability or justice. Public office is not a makam, it's a duty, and you answer to your people, all the people you serve. That, in my opinion, is the core essence of modern Lebanon, for better or worse. That has been I'm going to say this carefully without trying to criticize anyone here, and I'm sort of stepping back. It's the raison d'etre of Lebanon, meaning that this is what happens. When there's accountability and when there's justice, the communities go back and they do this sort of middle of the road negotiation, and the country fumbles. Long term, it erodes. And here we are today. It's hard for me to see this kind of governing. I don't even know if that's the right word anymore. This type of rule, it's hard for me to see this diminishing. And I say this in 2020. I say this after the blasts. And I say this even with all the good work that's being done on the ground. The NGO work, civil society work, some of it's remarkable. And I know you have sort of a role there too in the base camp. And there's a lot of stuff that's happening, which is very positive. That should not be discredited one bit. But then this is happening too. And it seems to me like that's the norm. And I want you to tell me that I'm wrong here. In other words, that there's an expiration there's an expiration date on this type of governing, meaning the Sunni prime ministers come together and say, if you're going to attack us, you have to attack a Maronite and a Shia. And if the Shia happens, the same thing. And that kind of dance, that dance that we all know, that can you convince a skeptic that this is on its way out?
It's gonna end soon. And I say that because clientelism and this sectarian clientelism, it was only based on this idea of economic security, and the fact that they've all been called out, right? It was real, you know, as distant as it seems right now. But being in that square, hearing Kermelik Nabatiye, Kermelik Trablos, Kermel Ba, that unity that we felt, that was real. And you know that, I mean, what a lot of people do, you know, fail to see or don't look at is, and you started with, how does that feeling of 2020 go in? The revolution was faced with a very, very strong counter-revolution. Sectarianism, the main card that was played to kind of diminish everything that we've achieved, because let's not kid ourselves. The people who were there on October 17 that were pushing hard weren't alternative political party. They were the partisans of the traditional political parties who had had enough.
Yes, absolutely.
So, but then if you spend 6 months separated, right, and COVID as well, and we see this in the world, you're withdrawn from spaces where you're able to kind of mingle. The grocery store, going to the movies with someone who doesn't really look like you and sharing a movie experience. You're withdrawing back to environments that you're comfortable with, and that completely, I mean, removes the main essence for me that happened in October 17, which was the talks and the book exchanges and the public debates. And that was the magic, and that was what scared them, and that's where we need to go. So going back to this idea of clientelism, they are morally and they are script-wise, they're broke. They have nothing else to say other than this idea of, I need to protect my sect, or I need to protect my own people. But I mean, the way that we're going, and the way that if they're going to keep up this strategy of no action, then I generally don't see how they're going to be able to kind of convince their own people that, yeah, I'm sorry you can't get your money out of the bank. I'm sorry that you can no longer pay for tuition. I'm sorry that you don't have electricity. I'm sorry that you might not even have food to eat. And then I think people at that point go, you know, screw my Maronite rights or my Dirzi rights or my Sunni rights or my Shia rights. Like, well, for what?
I don't think of March 14 in a negative way. And I think maybe there's been a lot of pushback in recent months in particular, that March 14 is a toxic sort of chapter, that it's a sectarian chapter, that it's the old sort of stuff. And to me, I don't remember March 14 that way. And I kind of want to pick your brain on this. I remember the first days after February 14, and then the weeks leading up to March 14 as equally magical. That you had people coming from all sides of the city for the first time since the war ended. They were all part of political parties, and they were very visible. They had those flags, and it was almost taken for granted that that's going to be part of the story. At the same time, people were pushing for something new. There's something that happened after March 14, which maybe I'm pushing a little too far here, but I don't think of that kind of euphoria ending naturally. I thought of it ending violently. And that movement, for all its flaws, for all of its, can argue about it until we all die, but for all its problems, it was killed. It was eliminated. There's none of that happening right now. There isn't sort of a direct targeting against the October 17 uprising. But I sense that the core issue remains, that people cannot express themselves fully, politically in particular, so long as there's a violent threat. And you kind of mentioned this already, that it's true. 2020, many things went wrong, and there's also the counter-revolutionary aspect. And the counter-revolutionary aspect was from all sides. It wasn't just one group or one, but you had there is there's an issue of violence that persists, and that politics cannot be done in Lebanon properly so long as violence is the counter threat. Does any of that resonate with you? But before we get back into how we got to October 17, that there's a issue that has not been addressed fully, and that may be the permanent stumbling block, even if there's another round of hope years from now, even if people try once more, that they're going to hit the same wall at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, just to answer you as well, I still look at March 14, 2005 as probably one of the proudest days of my life. Without the day specifically, I'm not talking about the movement, I'm not talking about how it evolved, but that day, I still remember it like it was yesterday. I still remember walking from AUB Gate, walking through Clemenceau, seeing people kind of throwing right. It was a magical day, and seeing the entire country kind of for the first time. And we had talked about this. I mean, even if there were political flags there, and they were very present, it was a sea of the Lebanese flag, and seeing everyone kind of come together and saying that, asking for something extremely nationalist and the pride, and also for an occupation that we thought would never ever end.
Right, absolutely.
It was, yeah. I mean, that's, if you go back to 2004 or 2003, it's so that we're gonna actually achieve what happened in 2005.
And it was a rare occasion for positive nationalism. And in history, you don't really have these moments, and Lebanon did it. It waved its flag for the first time proudly in many years. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. It was positive, nationalism. But I just want to go back to that movement. I think, the parties that said that they're going to kind of fulfill the dreams, everyone that was in a coalition of March 14 was practically a liar, and I don't think that the majority of them could end up could say today that they fulfill that they're liars. And you talk about violence, that yes, we're always going to be faced with violence as the antithesis or something that's constantly there, is simply because these are violent political parties. These are political parties who came in on violence, who, you cannot separate you cannot separate the violence of the civil war. You can't separate the economic violence that they've conducted and they've waged by hijacking institutions, by making sure that every single institution in the country is completely extractive, by making sure that democracy is not actually participatory, but by ensuring that they're constantly there to kind of take the decisions, and cut the pie up, as everyone says. And that brings us back to Hariri again, and the same names. And for me, it's I really can't understand it, how they have one operation of vision, and you can almost predict it. They're going to come in, they're not going to be efficient, it's going to be across the pie, they're going to say that they tried to do the forensic audit but this happened, they're going to come up with excuses. We've been down this road so many times before. And I say it confidently. I think that the current political elite and the current political regime, it's not in their, words like governance, words like participation, words like vision. It's not in their software. It's not part of their DNA. They know how to govern. Again, using that term very loosely, they know how to govern in one way and one way only, and that's put us firmly in the worst case scenario. Every single scenario that we've feared since October 17, we're realizing it simply because it's ideal for them. Again, I'm not here to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but if anyone believes that it's not their plan, that we do nothing, if the market fixes itself to a certain extent, we have 150,000 to 200,000 Lebanese who immigrate. Those Lebanese are going to immigrate feeling like they still have something in the country. They're going to send money back, and we reinvent ourselves, and we take it there, and we work on the sectarian. That's it. It's just it's a bad Groundhog Day that we're constantly going through with this regime, and this is why for us it's important, and people go like, what are you still doing here, right? Why are you still fighting? It's an uphill battle. I know it's an uphill battle. Everyone in Minteshreen knows it's an uphill battle, but if we're not going to fight them, if we're not going to, stand in their face and tell them enough is enough, and push for whatever we're able to push for, and hopefully inspire a generation that comes after us. And we're seeing it in the universities, and we're, then what's the point? What was October 17th for if we're not going to continue this fight? And we're not going to quit when it's easy. That's not the way to go.
I fully agree, and I think every battle is uphill by default. So the fact is, this hill is just a little sort of steeper than it maybe should be for a country that has, in a way, paid so much in terms of patience and financial pain and obvious and physical pain as well. So let's say it's very steep terrain. The roadmap that you're describing, and I think that is in Minteshreen's essence. And I hope I mean, I say this as somebody just observing, not somebody who's involved directly. I see it as sort of a platform to get us out of this situation into something better. That includes also addressing core issues like the social pact. That includes maybe even things that we're not too familiar with. I mean, I'm no expert on the sort of intricacies of law per se, but at the same time, I sense that there's a platform to get us into something that's better, and not everyone has to agree all the time on what that better thing is. But just in terms of applying that roadmap in 2020 down the road, and then looking back on the failure of March 14, which you're describing, just in terms of getting this platform to its destination, is there any concern that the reasons March 14, not necessarily the movement, but like you said, the spirit of that moment, that it won't meet the same fate? That debates over the long-term planning of debates about fixing Lebanon, they're great. And we do this, I think it's in our nature now to debate on every issue. And it's maybe the healthiest form of expression that Lebanon has seen, where every issue is being discussed openly. And I think there's very little fear now of speaking your mind about all issues. But violence can be talked about, it can be addressed maybe, but when there's action against it, it's met in a very sort of, it's met in a way that's meant to silence. And that silencing factor is what keeps many good ideas from taking hold in Lebanon. So and maybe it's a convoluted question, but can you see a roadmap emerging where the violent threat remains, but the politics can be improved, and that you can kind of, in a way, dance around the issue? Because I'm trying to see how it survives.
I mean, I think what's also important, and what we try to do in Minteshreen, and I'll explain a couple of initiatives that we're working on, is that October 17 was extremely ambitious, and what we aspired for. And every single time that someone says we need to fix the country, it feels like there's this monumentous task. And I agree, because let's call a spade a spade. We're a failed state. This is a failed country. This is a country that doesn't offer anything for its people. But where do you start? And that's where you kind of break it down into little goals. I can tell you about Basecamp, and Basecamp has evolved in terms of from just being a relief presence to projects called Sustainable Urban Neighborhoods. We're trying to recreate certain streets in Jaitewe as well, to kind of redevelop what that street needs in a communal effort, and in a communal way, where the way that a country the size of Lebanon should be, where you're able to have a couple of streets that completely interact with each other. And that's a model that could be piloted to other cities as well. And we don't need to go on a nationwide level, but that in itself is a counter to not confessionalism, because I respect that you can be of any religion and exist in this neighborhood, but of clientelism. At the same time, for example, something like another project is also solar powers. Solar powered energy as well is something Lebanon is a perfect climate for that. Yeah. And you're able to kind of, sure, the first aspect of violence, you asked about violence, is that we're going to face the cartel / mob of the generators. But it's an important risk, or it's an important step you have to take. Or healthcare. Healthcare is probably one of the most corrupt industries that exists in Lebanon. It's completely, taken by the political parties. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of insurance. There's a lot of paperwork, and this idea that there are actual Lebanese people dying because they can't get the care. That can be countered with going back to neighborhood public health initiatives, and so starting small. Um, I also think that part of the counter revolution as well is to make you despair, to make you hope, to kind of show up with guns and mopeds or threats or whatever you want to call it, to make you despair and to make you feel like the task is an impossible one. But I think right now, unlike 2005 and unlike any previous time in history, we're talking about an economic catastrophe. We're talking about a social catastrophe, and that can only be countered with public service or politics in the favor of public service, not being, not just going to the people when we need them over elections campaign, but being for the people when they need us, when they need the community, by listening to them, by allowing them to participate in budgets, in taking certain decisions, in having a completely transparent way of, if you pay taxes, this is what the taxes are end up going to. And in our opinion, it's just these really small initiatives that generally could make a difference in the lives of the Lebanese. And you start from there, and you kind of build from there. And I mean, this idea of a roadmap as well in itself is kind of surreal for a country like Lebanon, right? Like, I mean, I don't think any of us could have sat there in 2018 after the elections, obviously being disappointed, but I don't think any of us could have predicted that this is where we're going to be almost 2 years later. And I think what the region is going through and what the country is going through is something that hasn't happened before in history. I don't think it's happened in the 100 years of the Greater Lebanon, and I don't think a lot of us know what's going to happen next. And all you can do is just what's in front of you and take care of it as best as you can.
This immediate support, and that I think is probably it's a very impressive reaction where you have something so heinous, this ammonium nitrate explosion that sends half the city into despair, an already tired country, an already impoverished society faced with an explosion of such magnitude. And that's in August. Now we're in December. The immediate response is fantastic. The care taken, the windows replaced, the shelter, the assistance from the common person. Forget confessionalism, forget any of that. Just the decency among people was so impressive for anyone in the country or outside. Just watching this, and really remarkable. In my mind, what's equally remarkable is the silence. Now, I know it's not the task of a civil society, of an NGO, or even a protester necessarily to take matters into their own hands and deliver justice. That's not how it works. At the same time, it's just so depressing that, what is it? Maybe a few officials here and there are being summoned. That's not justice. And I sense that there may be no appetite for going all the way. And that could be for many reasons. But I just want to reflect. There's a quote, I think it's from yesterday on Twitter. We were all sort of tweeting about Hassan Diab and being sort of there. And there's a tweet. And I'm sorry to focus on your tweets only, but they do speak to the moment. So
yeah.
I'm going to reflect one last time on Twitter, then I'll leave you alone from Twitter. But it's a quote that it struck me as speaking to the moment. And you're reciting, I think, Timur Azhari. He sort of posted something, and this is a comment on his post. And this is from you. Justice will always be underwhelming in this country. staged by the political elite as they see fit. However, if this is the start of a long road to justice, so be it. We shouldn't relent the pressure on this heinous crime. It's the last two sentences, the start, and also we shouldn't relent. Is this really the start for justice in your mind? Meaning that a judge called in a few officials and sort of maybe did something that seems correct for the first time, but it's very underwhelming, and it seems to be pointing in one direction, for better or worse. And also, do you really sense that the pressure is still there from people demanding accountability for this blast? In other words, are these lines born out of hope more than reality? And I'm not trying to sort of be condescending here. I'm just really trying to get to where we are in terms of expectations. That is this something that's really beyond our control? That if there's no investigation, can't really do much about it. And this also alludes to the fact that there's no international investigation into this blast, which is horrifying. If anything, this is the type of blast that needs a lot of help in analyzing and getting to the bottom. It seems to be political scores being settled rather than a true investigation.
So this political class, I mean, in case you didn't already know it, are so hypocritical and downright disgusting that every single statement of theirs is, let's go to the judiciary and let the judiciary decide. And then when the judiciary acts, they do everything to kind of discredit it.
Yeah.
And it's just constantly, this game of what do you call it? Like a tug of war kind of thing with the judiciary. It's disgusting. And I mean, that without a proper judiciary, and this is why the independence of the judiciary has been, in my opinion, the most important demand since October 17 is so critical, because without it, and I'm not just talking about from political perspective, but that's where you protect your rights as a citizen on all forms.
Yeah.
So I also think that in this country we might not see proper justice, and I don't think that we will. I generally don't think that within this framework that we will see proper justice. I think that at best we might see a couple of these ministers maybe go down, but a lot of us would have unanswered questions. Why was the boat brought in? Who ordered this? Who took it? There's so many questions that need to be asked.
Yeah.
But we got to start somewhere, and that's for me. And we kind of talked about paralysis. There is almost always this approach of all or nothing, where we're really, what we need to be talking about when you talk about a roadmap. The roadmap essentially is just incremental gains. We have to start somewhere. If right now we have three ministers that up until a year ago were untouchable, go to jail. Okay, I'm not happy with it. I'm not satisfied with it. But okay,
I'm sorry to intrude here, but do you think that will happen? I mean, it's hard.
No.
Maybe I'm saying it out of pure pessimism.
No.
I don't know, but I can't see that.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, look. So a lot of people say that I'm an optimist. I'm not an optimist. I'm a possibilist. I think that things could. Yeah, really. It's just the possibility of things happening. Stranger things have happened, and I want to reiterate that where we are now, if you kind of just go back, we weren't there 5 years ago. We weren't there 10 years ago. We are in a different place, depending on how you look at it, depending on how you look at the world, depending on how you see things. And it's a start, and we need to build on that. And it's really important that if we see any sort of justice on this, that we push for it. And if it doesn't happen now, for me, I think it's critical that we don't relent. And the second part of your question is, do you really see people going for it? And I think that people are just emotionally broken. And I really don't hold anyone, I don't judge anyone, and I completely understand that. Because I want to go to August 8th. August 8th, a lot of people showed up on the street. A lot of people showed up with a lot of anger. And it was, a risk and a willingness and a kind of in-your-face approach that I saw people go like, you know what, we've lost everything, bring it on.
Yeah.
And, myself included, I was deep in the front lines. I got
You
and
were injured. I mean, yeah.
yeah, I got shot. I got rubber bullets in my arm, and I got the pellet gun in my legs. Because I was so deep inside, next to next to almost the wall between Virgin, the real wall, none of the barricades,
Yeah.
and people were met with live ammunition and rubber bullets and pellets and tear gas, even just by standing there. So, and with the fact that you can't, you think, do I go to my job and try to make any sort of living, or do I go down to the streets and demand justice? I don't blame anyone for having to make that decision, but activism or fighting for something doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight. The idea of independent, the term of independence of judiciary, up until a year ago, right before the revolution, legal agenda and a few activists talked about it. Now it's a mainstream topic.
That's true. Yeah.
And we might not get justice tomorrow, but hopefully we'll get justice in one way or another. Because it's not gonna, we cannot forget this. We cannot forget August 4. We cannot forget any of the crimes that have happened. We cannot forget the financial crimes. We can't just, now it's no longer the time that the Lebanese are used to, which is, okay, we're just gonna turn the page and we're gonna pretend like it started. That's done. At the least of it, it's done because we all have our Twitter accounts and we have our Facebook accounts, and at least there are still people that go down to the street and talk about it. Mainstream news, right? LBCI was doing a fantastic report on corruption, just like Al Jadid is. And a lot of people, and the all of nothing approach, a lot of people say, okay, where were they for the last 10 years? Why are these reports coming out now? Yes, I see that point. I do see that point, and it's a genuine point as to why was the mainstream media compliant with all of this. But if they change now, and now that we have the mainstream TV stations also calling people out on their corruption, then these figures are now in the court of public justice. There's no way that we don't look at that as progress.
So the
maybe right now I'm not being a possibilist. Maybe I'm being an optimist. Maybe I'm being overly optimistic. But there's no way that we can look at this as for me, you can't look at it as progress. And then last but not least, you just said something, sorry, you said something about the international an international investigation. And I agree that an act that is so heinous and so, it's a crime against humanity, what happened. Generally, it's a crime against, you can't sit in silence, but it's time for the Lebanese to really start taking matters of what happens in their country in their own hands. We know that an international investigation, the size of the STL, how it was politicized, how when it was incepted until justice was served, if we're going to say that, we know what happened in terms with the Assad regime, and we know how certain things were now put off limit. And the people who need to care about Lebanon the most are the people who are in this land, all of the Lebanese. This is our land. No other country, as much as they pretend, they're going to care about their own interests first, which is understandable, which is what any country is supposed to do. And kind of our fault is that our leaders are essentially just rented, mouthpieces, and the interests of Lebanon never has come first. But that comes from the people. That comes from the people, saying, no, I want my independent judiciary. It's a right. It's not, it's not just some fantasy.
You know what? It's good to hold on to any positive development. And I think a possibilist maybe would focus in on the incremental steps which you're describing. But we can step back a bit and maybe get into exactly what is possible now. And even if it's small, but it still matters, with Minteshreen, given the current situation. And if you don't mind, maybe you can help me understand, in terms of, if we're not able to address the larger issues, and those larger issues could be about sovereignty, they could be about foreign policy, they could even be about sub-state weaponry. I think most countries would probably find it very difficult to get to the small issues while those big issues are not addressed. But let's say Minteshreen is up to the challenge. and it's really like, it's almost like a cliff rather than a hill. So it's really like, it's kind of like rock climbing, actually. Incremental
Yeah.
rocks, and you get to the top at some point
Yeah.
if you're lucky. And you need a good
Yeah.
rope. But that kind of, against all odds, incremental changes, what is Minteshreen trying to do if let's say elections come and there are seats in parliament? And you know what? You mentioned this earlier, and it should be emphasized more and more. The student elections are important. I mean, there is change happening in certain areas. It may not be immediately visible. It's not in the halls of power per se, but there is a generation growing up that wants something different. So that there is something there, and it should be noted. But let's say parliamentary elections happen, or whatever, any elections happen, and Minteshreen is involved. I would like to know, what are those possible changes, even if they're incremental, even if they're slow paced, given the current situation, given the way given the way Lebanon has emerged. I mean, it's every problem that you can imagine, and you're faced with it. So, what could the good voices in Minteshreen do, given that that's your challenge? Your challenge is it's a very dysfunctional, very violent, very chaotic, but in some ways solid intercommunal power sharing monster that seems to find its way over time. So, what is Minteshreen's immediate goals? Not necessarily the long term. We can even we can get into that later, but the
Yeah.
immediate goals. And maybe you can help me sort of unpack them.
I think there's one catastrophe that's facing us in 2021, and that's economic. And with economic, you have social implications. For me and for a lot of my peers, education. We're not talking about education. We're not talking about the fact that 65% of Lebanese students go to private universities, and with with an exchange rate that's changing, that means that they no longer are able to kind of pay for schools and for universities. Public sector, I think we know the state of the public sector. So I think in the immediate term, that is where our focus is. Our focus is on social protection, and that is done through initiatives like technical support, mental health support, educational aspects, where we have an economy that's created where we have a lot of talented and educated people who are able to give classes, who are able to continue education for people who can no longer afford it. That is the most critical component. That can also be done with the, and not can be done, will be done with the support of the huge diaspora network. The other aspect is certain initiatives like the environment. Fun fact: 70% of our organic waste, 70% of our waste in Lebanon is organic. And guess what this government do? Yeah, guess what this government does? We import fertilizer.
I did not know.
No joke.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
yeah, no joke. Yeah, exactly. So by creating sorting centers, look, the more that we do this, and part of the exercise that we did was really go through. We're working on our political plan and our political manifesto, and it should be live on our website that we're launching at the beginning of 2021. But we really went into the tiniest details, and it's surreal. It's really surreal that the decision making that was agreed upon, this get rich scheme that they did, is just bizarre. But I mean, again, I don't want to talk about them anymore. But so sorting centers, and what sorting centers essentially does is it creates jobs. At the same time, you're able to sell that to municipalities. You're able to give subsidies in a certain sense on whoever uses organic waste, and that automatically creates an economy. Other industries that Lebanon can end up being competitive in. That is essentially how you plan for a country. That's the core way of how you plan for a country. What are my people good at doing? And I'm not worried about the Lebanese. And again, this is another aspect of Possiblist. We're a talented, creative, hungry, people. If we have the right instruments, we'll rebuild our economy. There's no worry there. The worry is what you're saying: the bigger issues, the security issues, the geopolitical issues, our geography. but if I think, if we think about that, and that's always going to be a threat, then we lose the opportunity to do anything. And I go back to this counter revolution of despair, of despair and lose hope. So just to go back to the question, the immediate thing is taking care of each other. We have to take care of each other. And any discussion about I want to go into parliamentary seats or I want to go into my municipalities, we go back to the same rhetoric that we've heard, which is extremely exclusive. We need to go into more inclusive politics. We need to go down back to to how to build a proper country. I'm personally, I'm not nostalgic for what Beirut used to be. I'm not. I miss obviously the hustle and bustle of it, and I miss the energy of it, and I miss that feeling of life. But we didn't have a country. We didn't have a, yes, we had the nice bars and we had rooftop clubs and we had nice restaurants, and Beirut is beautiful for shopping.
Grand Factory is not a bad place to spend the weekend.
No, not at all. It's a lovely place, and we're also committed to bringing that back. But what we used to do at the Grand Factory all the time was also use that platform, use the fact that we had 4,000 youth to kind of give environmental messages, to kind of give back to the community. We didn't have a country. We had places that weren't accessible by 99% of the population. We had this extractive monster that removed us from our rights, and we were just happy of living way above our means. We were happy with this this fake economy that we were living in. And we shouldn't go back to that, and none of us should kind of miss those days. We have a momentous task right now, and it's about building the country. And I don't think that me and you and our generation are going to reap the rewards of it, but if we're able to lay the groundwork for a successful state, for our kids, for our grandkids, then we would have done our job. That's what public service is.
But so these, in a way, you've kind of listed them out in a very easy way to, it's so appealing. You have an economic sort of agenda, you have an educational policy in a sense, and you're also addressing environmental concerns. So it's very straightforward. It's almost like the basic functioning of a state. You're trying to get the state to work. Do you think these areas are shielded enough from the larger problems that there's ways to fix these issues while ignoring others? Is that kind of a built-in ethos maybe for Minteshreen, that there's areas we can address, but we cannot necessarily address the bigger things because those are beyond our control? And am I getting that right? So like, for example, the security situation, or everyone talks about it now, people never talked about it before. Hezbollah is still an armed group. And this is 30 years since the civil war ended. They're still involved. So that there's no way to even talk about that group's weapons at this stage. That's something, just put it aside. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, because there's a lot of things that we can't control. Not only can we not control it, but we don't have the capabilities or the resources or even the decision-making power to kind of discuss those things. It's just beyond their reach. Maybe one day, hopefully one day, not just as Minteshreen, any independent or movement or any person has the right to kind of participate in this country, but as long as there's vision and as long as there's transparency and all that. So I genuinely hope that one day we'll be able to be empowered to take those decisions. Maybe we can't do anything about them, but we need to talk about them. And that's also something that, in my opinion, is progress. Like you said, the Hezbollah issue 5 years ago, we couldn't talk about it. Now, we need to talk. We have to talk about it. We have to talk about the fact.
But I know I'm asking a big question here, and you say as much as you'd like. It may be an unfair question, but is that something that would emerge at this stage, or is that something for later? So in other words, let's say early next year, there's a platform people can access, and it's an appealing platform. It addresses fundamental issues. Do you think it would also address that fundamental issue at this stage, or is it just too soon? That's sort of, it's not on the agenda.
No, we have a position. Right now you can't create a political party or a credible one and a serious one, if you're going to just ignore the issues that you're comfortable talking about and sweep other issues away. We have a position on Hezbollah.
I'm really happy you're saying that.
And very,
yeah, sorry.
And very clearly, just to very clearly, we believe in resistance. We believe in the Palestinian cause is a very rightful cause, and it's not one that we shouldn't. And we share that. Lebanon is a country that was abused by Israel. But we also don't agree that the resistance is able to be kidnapped by a singular party that's used in sectarian terms, which essentially is shared in clientelism terms. And in terms of a country, no self-respecting state can allow for anyone other than the state itself to take decisions of war and peace. That's our position, and we'll be willing to debate it with anyone that we need to talk about. It's a Lebanese decision, and it's a Lebanese issue that we need to deal with. We don't believe in certain things like 1559 and 1701, because that also goes back into this idea of sovereignty of Lebanon. And when we're dealing with issues of Lebanon, especially with a neighbor that's as expansionist and that's aggressive as Israel, then it goes back to Lebanese decision of what the Lebanese state needs to do. But we have a position similar to us having a position on Syria. The fact that if with the regime, and hopefully a clean regime that comes in, because the Assadist regime is not really a regime that you can deal with, and Lebanon has already felt that, to also have an amicable and trusting relationship between two sovereign nations. We can't also sweep that under the rug as well. You need to, right now, I think that, and this is also progress, we're willing to talk about these issues. Because for too long, we've been told, sweep it under the rug. Now's not the right time to talk about it. We'll talk about it next time. And we look what happened when we kind of started ignoring things. We can't ignore these things anymore.
For me, it's the first time I've heard this, which is it's in a way refreshing. I haven't heard up until now anyone who's willing to say two things at the same time, and it sort of adds up, and in the sense that against 1559 and against 1701. But fundamentally Lebanese sovereigntist, nationalist in a positive way. That it's almost like it's almost like that's the kind of dialogue you would want when it comes to asserting the Lebanese position, but not counting on anyone else. It's almost like ignore whatever UN Security Council resolutions are there. Let's do this on Lebanon's terms. It could end up being the same position long term, but the fact is that this is an indigenous movement. It's not looking for external support. So I appreciate that view. I haven't heard that one yet, but also sorry, keep going.
No, just to add to that, you said dialogue, and I don't mean dialogue the way that al-hiwar, that this political elite has also kind of done, but I mean, yes, you're a Lebanese person who has issues with Hezbollah's weapons. Fair, I respect that. But I also respect the son or the daughter of the South, who ever since the 70s, the Lebanese state has essentially told the South to go fend for yourself. And there is this, movement called Hezbollah that was born, that created institutions that gave them protection, that protected them in their houses and their lands, and they're loyal to that party. And those are Lebanese people. They're my brothers and my sisters in this nation. And it's extremely important to and this is why for us it's Lebanese. We cannot have this black and white ideology, identity politics, that if I disagree with you on politics and you're my enemy, especially in a country that is so diverse and so multifaceted. We need to, and again, that's the beauty of October 17. All of these, we were 1 million people, we were 2 million people. That doesn't matter. That really is the TV stations like that. What really mattered is the conversations that you had, the fact that you were interacting with people that you thought you'd never interact with. Going up to Tripoli and experiencing Tripoli and the people of Tripoli in all its glory. That's the Lebanon that we dream of. It's not this idea of I have bad blood with you, and because I disagree with you on the way forward, then you're my enemy. And it needs to be a constructive dialogue, and dialogue always means that both sides are willing to have a dialogue to agree on a certain point. But we believe that that's the way forward.
Fully agree. And the dialogue that was set up in the past was really it's almost like managing a sinking ship dialogue. It's not real dialogue. It's not dialogue
Yeah.
meant to take some, it's not the type of dialogue that offers solutions. It's dialogue for the sake of dialogue, which doesn't really do much. It actually tarnishes the word dialogue, which is meant to be positive. But that aside, do you think that that's part of the reason why earlier attempts at inclusivity, which I think is what you're hinting at repeatedly, which it resonates, that you're trying to reach out and make sure everyone has a way into this kind of movement, that the inclusivity was there before, and that could be something like Beirut Medinati on a smaller scale, that's just municipal issues, but it was an inclusive idea. It didn't sort of, I don't think it was off limits to anyone per se. That's inclusive, but something like that is just not able to address the bigger issues, or deliberately chooses to ignore the bigger issues. And maybe Beirut Medinati is too small, but even Kulluna Watani, that kind of sort of, we're going to only talk about what we can do without talking about what we can't. Inclusive, but also turning a blind eye. Do you think that this is an auto-correction, if you will? This is like learning what those groups did wrong and trying to do it the right way now? And is that kind of the way forward? Start small, aim high, and hope you land somewhere in the middle, at least in the coming years? Because that sounds like there is the birth of something new. It's taking hold, and it's there. And if it gets attacked, it's very visible this time that this is a non-confessional, all-inclusive Lebanese group that has nothing to do with the old ways. And if it's being attacked, it's clear that they're being attacked from a group that's hell-bent on holding on to something from the past.
If we don't evolve, we die. If we don't reconcile with our past and really learn from our past, and I think that's another big issue that we've had in Lebanon. We've constantly been robbed of our history, or we find that the easy way out is just to kind of sweep it under the rug and don't talk about it. We need to reconcile. We need to learn from our history. We need to accept it. We cannot just keep, just turning a blind eye. That it's not healthy. It's not healthy in any context you want to go into. I don't necessarily think, by the way, Beirut Medinati did any mistakes. I always dream and think that, if they won, and I personally hold the conviction that I think that Beirut Medinati did in fact win a couple of seats. I dream about the Beirut that we might have seen for the last 4 years. Yeah, we might not have dealt with the biggest issues. We might still be in this this hole that we find ourselves in. But I dream sometimes that if they actually won, what the city of Beirut would have looked like. Now, 2018, that's where the mistake was. Don't vote for them, vote for us, which is pretty much the way that the political parties kind of exist right now.
Oh, meaning
they're
from
the bad guys.
From Kulluna Watani. Right.
Yeah,
right.
from Kulluna Watani, like these guys kind of, took the state hostage, these political elites and this political regime. You need to vote for us because we're going to show you the light. We're going to show you the promised land. And people didn't accept that because there was no credibility. And if you think about it, that language is exactly what the political establishment parties do right now, which is that other guy is the one that's really screwing you over. I'm the one that's going to take you to the promised land.
Yeah.
So I mean, we need to not only focus on the issues and on the policies that you had mentioned before, but there also needs to be an understanding of what it means to kind of participate in this country and what inclusion means.
You know what?
Inclusion not only
No, please go ahead. I keep interrupting you because I have so many things to
say. Go. Yeah.
But no, please finish that thought about inclusion.
So inclusion in the sense that not only from the aspect of this party belongs to everyone, and this is the way that we see it, that this party belongs to any Lebanese who believes in a sovereign country, who believes in a country that is governed by the rule of law, that believes in the accessibility of what we're supposed to do, the fact that education is a right, living is a right, healthcare is a right, eating, being able to eat. This is something that we talk about. These are rights. These are fundamental rights that the state, it's their duty to give it to the citizens. And that also needs to go into the inclusion. We need to be a country where right now they're talking about the banking reforms, that yes, if you are from the top 300 accounts in this country, you need to pay your fair share due of participating in the society, protect the most vulnerable. We can no longer exist in this jungle state where the strong eat the weak and the weak don't have any tools to protect themselves. And that as well, in terms of the rhetoric, in terms of the language, in terms of also understanding the other, that yes, I understand that you might have barriers you might have fears, you might have distrust, and honestly, that's how the country has been run. It's been run with a very Hobbesian kind of view on human nature, that you might kind of stab me in the back at any time. And what October 17 has proven to us, and what the aftermath of August 4 proved to us, is that we have a lot more that unites us and separates us, and the Lebanese are genuinely there for each other. And that message needs to constantly be carried, because it's so easy to kind of break it.
This, I think, positive message, optimistic message of inclusion is what pulls me into a group like Minteshreen, or at least the voices that I hear, willing to express that layer of society, which is fundamental, that yes, the differences are small, and the differences may actually be positive if we were able to express them the right way. Differences are not a bad thing. And I like that you keep saying this in different ways, that not everyone has to agree all the time on one thing. You can have disagreements, but the foundation should be there, that there should be just enough agreement on what the core issue is and what the platform is. And you know what? If Basecamp has a political mirror and it's Minteshreen, why the hell not? I mean, that seems like the most appealing option in what's available. And what's available is really, I mean, the usual suspects are so out of date now and so unappealing that the fact that Basecamp has done such outstanding work, it stands tall. And I'd like to see that kind of social protection, if you will, discussed in the halls of power, which is where it should be
Yeah.
discussed. It shouldn't be discussed online. And these, in a way, you're talking about them. This is kind of where I want to wrap it up with. You've been very generous, by the way, with your time. You've given me a lot of your time, so I want to thank you for that.
No, this is great. This is a conversation that also we should be having in constantly. So really,
Well,
as long as you want.
well, thank you. I would keep you too long. So let's talk about. I don't know if maybe echo chamber is the right word here. Whether it's an online ecosystem that's not real, it's just online. You talked about Twitter earlier. I mean, it's any social media, I guess, that it's the familiar names that are at times eloquent, at times vulgar, sometimes they're ranting, sometimes they're sort of poetic, and it's the voices we all know, but it's not the voices we hear necessarily. We read them or we see posts by them. And then there's the stuff we know, which is, and I'm going to sort of give you an option, relatives, immediate family that don't see it this way, neighbors that just this doesn't resonate. I'll give you my own examples. I am somehow related to the Karami family. It's through my grandmother on my father's side. So there's a Karami extension. I know them, but I don't really know them. I know them mostly online, for the most part. But some I don't. I know in real life. This doesn't sit with them at all. I mean, Faisal Karami is the natural leader, and that's that. The grandson. I mean, it's the Omar Karami's son. I don't know him. He means nothing to me. I guess he's a third cousin. I'm not sure, but to them, there's no one else. It's Faisal Karami. That's the conservative sort of side, and then you get the more maybe the more hopeful sort of corner. No, it's still Hariri. I mean, you can say they will criticize him. They will say many bad things about him, but he's the Sunni leader. And that sort of that toxic way of describing somebody, the Sunni leader, this doesn't appeal to me one bit. I'd rather be 5% of my community, but it's the 5% that I agree with, not the 95% that I disagree with. And that you can't pull that out of them. And this is Tripoli. And Tripoli is the city that we celebrate for being able to stand tall and say, we're out of this mess. But I don't know if that's necessarily everyone in Tripoli. And I don't know if it's a big enough population that is willing to say goodbye to the leaders we know. And I'm giving you a very silly example. It's very, very minor, very sort of very immediate example, but these are relatives. And then think about all the other people that we don't talk to, that are not in our echo chamber. It'd be hard for me to assume, and I could be wrong here, it's hard for me to assume that the majority of Lebanese are ready to let go. It seems to be that we are, in a sense, in a bubble. And it's the same bubble that emerged in previous attempts at change. You stink, was the bubble. March 14 was maybe a big enough bubble, but it quickly shrank. And now I don't know if that's happening once again. Maybe you can help me out of this tunnel that I don't know if most Lebanese see this as the way forward. Even if it is the way forward, even if there's really no other option. But for better or worse, the usual suspects are still around. They're still in power. And Hariri, he's protecting Hassan Diab from sort of Sunni criticism and all that. That's where we are right now. And it kind of goes back to the beginning of the conversation, which is, I don't know. I just don't know. Confessionalism and the worst aspects of it, that clientelistic way, it seems so deep and so entrenched that it sort of makes that steep cliff, if you will. There's almost nothing to hold the rope to. It's just like almost a free fall at times. So you're the possibilist. You've offered many examples of how to sort of, in a way, offer immediate small improvements. Am I getting this wrong? That people are saying these things, but it's outdated and it's fading. It just takes time. And that we're now at the beginning of that. It may look hopeless, it may look bleak, but it's the first step. And long term, it's going to happen. That long term, these ideas will just fade.
I think the first thing that needs to happen when we talk to family members is probably change the way that we talk to these family members. I think that a lot of times the reaction is my point of view, your point of view, and then it wraps up with, but they robbed us of our dignity. How can you still vote for them? You're stupid. And the conversation ends there.
You're not my son. You're not my mom.
You're not my mom. I talk about my personal experience. My father is he's a partisan of the Progressive Socialist Party. And the conversations that I've had with my father have completely been different in the last 5 years. So I think that there's a way, and there's a nuanced way of conversing with especially your family, because if you're not able to kind of share your messages with people who, I don't know about your cousins and the Karams, if you don't know them out that well, but if you're not able to kind of share your ideas with those closest to you, then definitely you're going to be in an echo chamber. But if your ideas are being heard, and then if you focus again on not necessarily the attack of certain of these leaders, even though they completely deserve every single kind of slander and insult that they deserve to get, but if you're talking about going outside of our immediate circles and going outside of our of the way of our world perception, if you focus on not the divisive, not the finger pointing that it's going to be antagonistic, but you actually focus on the 90% where they agree with you, which is my right to an education, my right to healthcare, my right to housing, my right, no one can disagree with you on that. No one can disagree with you on classist discussions. That at the end of the day, we have the 1% of the banking militia, government mafia that has accumulated insane amounts of wealth and still are, versus 99% of the people who are suffering. And then you ask about the possibility of change. There's also this idea that we need to focus on the parliamentary elections, but there's also the municipality elections as well.
Sure. Yeah.
That also unlock a lot of possibilities for change. And if all of us kind of go back to these communities that we can participate in, because then the parliamentary election opens up this idea of districts, and I don't really have a close connection to my MP. So accordingly, I can't hold him accountable. I don't know what his KPIs are, and no. But if you break it down to a municipal level, and that is also an instrument of change. That it becomes a much easier dialogue, because it might not be that you're talking about these big things, but you're actually starting on small things that impact people's lives. Or unions and syndicates. Our unions and our syndicates are also extremely powerful mechanisms that are instruments of change, if we're able to take them from the grips of this political elite and this regime, and actually have independent voices that are fighting for the good of that industry or for the good of that syndicate. You match that with municipalities. You match that with whatever's happening in universities as well. Yesterday, the Lebanese University, don't quote me on this, but I think the Lebanese University Teachers Council was also, there was a big independent kind of victory there in the Lebanese University. So look, all of this might just be, a dream. All of this might, tomorrow, things can happen in this country. But that hope, that's there. And if there's 1% hope, then we go for it all out. Because like you said, it's not going to be a blank page. It's not going to be that we wake up one day and we turn the page and everything's okay and it's rosy. States and countries that we believe in are tireless work, and it's continuous work, and it's not by 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 people. It's by communities. It's by waking up every morning and feeling like we can be better. And we need to be better, and we need to constantly try to improve it in any way that we can. And I think that is, if all of us focus on that, focus on what outlets can we improve, then there is light against the tunnel. But if we kind of, might criticize any move that doesn't might seem eye to eye with us, or kind of, if something doesn't go exactly the way that I want it, individualistic, then there's absolutely no point in pursuing this. But if we kind of switch that discussion to really being, we deserve better, but that starts with us. And the Lebanese have been apathetic for so long. We haven't participated. We have to acknowledge our own responsibility as well, that we let them get to the state. We were either tricked consciously or unconsciously, which is also, it's also fair, that we got to this point. But now we have an opportunity to kind of start changing that. And yes, all of us at Minteshreen and every single person at all the change parties, from Minfid to the National Bloc to Lihaqi to Beirut Medinati, everyone is aware of how long the road is. But you got to start somewhere.
I think the Possiblist message is key, and that absolutely without that glimmer of hope, there's really no point. And I see that glimmer of hope in groups like Minteshreen and voices like yours that have come to really appreciate. And I know it's important to say it's not one person or it's not a few people. I think it's a generational shift, and it's happening slowly. Shouldn't be discounted that groups that were considered jokes in the past, AUB Secular Club is one example that I remember from my own years being at AUB, was dismissed. It's almost like this is a glitch, and now it's winning, and it's not that long ago. So there are things happening. I think that's where the glimmer of hope is. It's in things like that, and maybe down the road There'll come a time where the bigger goals can be addressed effectively. I appreciate the medium-term goals, if you will, that almost point at what's your right, as opposed to anything that's sort of confessional or geopolitical. It's the basics: healthcare, education, employment, environment. It's your rights, and I think that emphasis is important. I think it's critical. And I'll say one last thing. I'm new to Instagram. And I find it embarrassing a bit that I reached out to you on Instagram. I was like, oh, I'm gonna email this man. I'm going to sort of politely send a professional email. I was like, I can't find his email. And then I went the Instagram route. I think that also speaks a bit to the moment that things have changed in recent years, and things keep changing. And now you have an audience, and you really do. You have a fan base, and you have an audience that's listening and paying attention. And I'm new to this whole game, but I found you that way, and I've grown to enjoy what you're saying and what you're posting through social media. And I really appreciate everything you've said, from the inclusion, from Minteshreen, from the bigger issues, from Hezbollah, from everything that went right and wrong following March 14, and the maybe the truth, which is that unless we do these things from within, unless we fix these things, we have no one else to blame but ourselves. And it's really up to the Lebanese now to fix this country and rebuild it. So thank you for staying up late, and I hope we can continue the discussion once the online platform is available and as Minteshreen develops and grows. And I'd really like to gauge your mind once more. And I'll just say one other thing: you're a lot smarter than me, but not that smart. And I'll tell you why. No books, 6 books. Behind you, 7 books, 8 books. We're
but this is like maybe like 2 years.
2 years.
Like I'm not like
You don't have that bookshelf that everyone puts on in their displays. You have the real literature, which is
yeah.
It's a book.
Yeah, that intellectual.
The 1,000
1,000,001 book kind of 1,000 book kind of.
I think you've got maybe 6 or 7 that are not even being read. So that's your background.
Yeah, absolutely. A bunch of DVDs over them as well. Just like,
I have closets, so we're humbling moment for every.
Yeah, absolutely.
Samir, thank you.
Ronnie, it's always a pleasure, and I also really enjoy this podcast, and it was great to be on it, and I think that the conversations you constantly have are extremely interesting, and that's the foundation to just building a country that we're all proud of. So thank you for this conversation, and hope to see you soon, man.
It's my honor, my pleasure. Thank you, Samir. Thanks for listening, and a friendly reminder to help support this podcast by contributing through Patreon or PayPal. All links are in the details box below. Until next time, I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.